He saw her every night pushing a mop down the hall, until one rainy evening he followed her and discovered a side of her that shattered everything he thought he knew about purpose. It always started the same way. Around 6:30 in the evening, as the sky over Baton Rouge dimmed and the city slid into that in-between space, too late for the rush hour, too early for the quiet, Jacob Reinhardt would head down the marble steps of the LaSalle building, his phone in one hand, keys in the other. Most nights, he barely noticed the people outside. Too many tenants, too many emails, too many things to fix that didn't actually matter. But that night, something stopped him. It was the rain. Not a storm, not even dramatic, just a steady drizzle that made the streetlights blur at the edges. And under one of those lights, sitting on a crooked metal bench at the bus stop, was a woman. She was wearing an oversized grey coat, the kind you only saw in discount bins or second-hand stores, and a plastic grocery bag wrapped around her shoes to keep the water out. A heavy purse rested on her lap, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the whole day had settled there. She didn't scroll through a phone or talk to anyone. She just waited. Jacob glanced at her, ready to walk on. But something caught in his chest. He squinted. He'd seen her before. She worked on the top floor. Quiet woman. Always polite, always early. Cleaning the same office 5 nights a week. She never asked for anything. Most of the tenants didn't even know her name. But Jacob did. Dolores. Dolores something. He'd seen her employee file once when he took over the building lease last spring. There hadn't been anything special on it. No notes, no complaints, just a photo and a signature. But now, in the cold rain, she looked tired in a way he couldn't ignore. He stood under the canopy and kept watching. What was she still doing here? He checked the time again. 6:32. The last Route 58. Bus came at 6:35. Maybe she lived out past Airline Highway, near where the city thinned out. Maybe she was just trying to get home. But then, out of nowhere, a memory punched him, something deep, from back when he was 12. His mother, standing in the rain outside their apartment in Lafayette, waiting for a ride that never came. He hadn't thought about that night in decades. He found himself walking closer to the curb, his eyes still on Dolores. She shifted her bag and pulled her coat tighter, blinking slow, like she was used to pretending nobody saw her. He didn't know why, he asked. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was that look. Quiet, sad, and completely invisible. But his mouth moved before he could stop it. "Hey, you need a ride somewhere?" Dolores looked up, startled. For a second, her eyes flicked to his face, then to his car behind him. "I'm fine," she said gently. Her voice was rough, but not cold. "Bus is almost here." Jacob nodded like he understood. But he didn't move. The bus did arrive, right on time, its brakes hissing as it rolled to a stop. She stood, stepped on, and didn't look back. He stood there another 10 seconds, then walked to his car, slid inside, and started the engine. But something gnawed at him. That look on her face. The bags under her eyes. The way she hugged that purse like it was all she had. He pulled out of the lot, then paused at the light. The bus was 3 cars ahead of him. Jacob hadn't followed anyone in his life. Not for real. But tonight, he flicked his blinker, turned right, and stayed just far enough behind to keep her in sight. But what he expected was not where she was headed. Jacob hadn't planned to follow anyone. He didn't even have a real reason for it. He told himself he was just curious, maybe even a little worried. But the truth was, something about Dolores Whitaker made it impossible to drive away. He stayed 4 cars behind the bus, careful not to tail too close. The windshield wipers kept time with his thoughts. Sharp, repetitive, just enough to remind him he was doing something strange. The Route 58 weaved out of the business district and headed west toward Riverbend. Not a neighborhood he visited often. Certainly not the side of town anyone in his circle talked about. At every red light, he debated turning back. But every time the bus kept moving, so did he. 32 minutes later, the bus pulled into a cracked shelter off Jefferson Highway, right across from an old gas station with one flickering light and a closed sign duct-taped to the window. Dolores stepped off. She didn't hesitate. She crossed the road, steady, like this was a path she knew by heart. Jacob parked half a block away, slouched low in his seat. He wasn't proud of what he was doing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this meant something. He just didn't know what yet. Dolores turned onto a side street, Nora Avenue. Jacob followed on foot now, staying close to the shadows. There were no sidewalks, just patches of dirt and old chain-link fences. She passed 2 shuttered shops and then walked into a faded brick building with a small sign out front. South Oak Community Center. Jacob stopped across the street. The center looked like it hadn't been painted since the late 90s. One window was boarded up, and the other had security bars bent at odd angles. But inside, the light was warm, golden. There was movement behind the glass. He stepped closer and peered through the cracks. Dolores was already in motion. Coat off, sleeves rolled up. She wasn't cleaning. She was serving. Pouring soup into styrofoam bowls, handing plates to people waiting in line. She smiled, hugged someone, then another. She knelt to wipe a little boy's face with a napkin. She touched an older woman's hand and held it there for a moment, long enough that Jacob could tell it meant something. He blinked, rubbed the fog off his window, looked again. This woman he'd seen for over a year, but never truly seen. She was a whole different person here. There were maybe 20 people inside, mothers with toddlers, a man with a sleeping bag, a girl with a split lip. The room was tight, the furniture mismatched, but no one seemed to care. They ate. They laughed, quietly. A few prayed over their food. Jacob stood there for 20 minutes, his hands in his pockets, watching a world that had nothing to do with him. It wasn't pity he felt. It was something deeper. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. He owned 3 buildings within 5 miles of this center. He had power, leverage, money. And yet here was Dolores, on her feet after an entire workday, spending her own time feeding strangers in a room that smelled like bleach and canned vegetables. He pulled his phone from his pocket, stared at the screen, then slid it back in. Nothing he could do right now would explain what he was feeling. Eventually, the line at the table got shorter. Dolores sat with a small group of kids and handed them juice boxes, leaning in like she was telling a story. It hit him hard. This was her real job, not mopping his marble floors, not pushing a cart of supplies up and down carpeted hallways. Here, she was somebody. A leader, a caregiver, a presence. He stayed longer than he meant to. The drizzle turned to light rain again, but he didn't care. When Dolores started wiping down tables and tossing trash, Jacob quietly slipped back to his car. He drove home in silence. No music, no calls, just questions. What else had he never noticed? How many people in his buildings were like Dolores, doing more with less, changing lives in ways no spreadsheet could measure? That night, he barely slept. He couldn't stop thinking about her hands, how steady they were, how many people they had touched in one evening without asking anything in return. But he wasn't done, not even close. The next morning, he showed up at her building 2 hours early, with something to say. By 6:45 the next morning, the building on Monroe Street was still half asleep. The janitor hadn't arrived yet, the elevators were still locked on the ground floor, and most of the lights were off. But Jacob Reinhardt stood in the lobby, holding a paper bag with 2 sausage biscuits and a black coffee. He hadn't touched either. He was too focused on the glass entrance, waiting for Dolores to walk through it. Part of him felt ridiculous. What was he even going to say? "Hey, I followed you last night." That sounded creepy. He rehearsed a dozen versions in his head. None of them felt right. And still, he waited. She walked in at 6:53. Same coat. Same slow walk. Same worn purse. But now Jacob saw it all differently. These weren't the markings of poverty. These were signs of someone who gave more than she kept. She didn't see him at first. She moved toward the elevator like she did every day. But when she looked up and caught his eyes, she paused. "Mr. Reinhardt." Her voice carried a trace of confusion. "You all right?" He nodded, cleared his throat. "Morning. I, brought breakfast. Was hoping you had a minute." Dolores looked at the bag in his hand, then back at him. She didn't move right away. I don't usually eat till after the floor's done. I get it. This'll only take a second. She gave a slight shrug and followed him to the bench near the vending machines. They sat down. Jacob handed her one of the biscuits. She looked at it, then unwrapped the foil slowly. He waited until she took a bite before speaking. I saw you last night, he said. She stopped chewing. I didn't mean to spy or anything, he added quickly. I saw you at the bus stop. And I guess something told me to see where you were going. Dolores put the biscuit in her lap. You followed me. I did. She raised an eyebrow, but her expression didn't turn hard, just tired. Why? Jacob hesitated. Because I've been running buildings for 15 years, and I never thought twice about who cleaned them. And then yesterday, I saw you sitting there, looking so still, like the world just walked right past you, and I realized I'd done the same. She didn't say anything for a long beat. Then, well, you got to see the mess after hours. That's all it is. That's not what I saw. Dolores looked at him. I saw you feeding people, he said. Kids, women, a man who could barely keep his head up. And you weren't just handing out food. You were talking to them, holding them, like it mattered. Dolores stared down at the coffee cup he'd given her, both hands wrapped around it. I've been going there a long time, she said finally. Started right after my son died. I needed something to do that wasn't crying. They didn't have much. Still don't. So I just helped. And then I kept showing up. Jacob nodded slowly. You've been doing that every week? After work? 3 times a week? Sometimes 4, if they're short. He blinked. Out of your paycheck? She chuckled softly, not out of pride, but realism. Ain't nobody paying me for that part, no. But food stamps stretch, and the corner store lets me buy dented cans cheap. She took another bite, chewing carefully. You ever told anyone here about it? Jacob asked. What for? He didn't have an answer. The elevator dinged behind them, and Dolores looked at the clock. I should get moving. Floor don't clean itself. Jacob stood as she did. Dolores, he said quietly, if I came back there sometime, just to see more, would that be okay? She gave him a long look. Not suspicious, just curious. You bring your own gloves, she said, cracking a small smile. We always short on those. Jacob smiled back. But what he didn't know was that behind that small smile, Dolores was still deciding whether to let him in, for real. Jacob didn't wait a week. He showed up the very next evening. He didn't wear his usual button-up shirt or loafers, just a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. A small box of latex gloves stuffed in his coat pocket, like she asked. He parked down the block, walked to the South Oak Community Center, and stood outside for a few seconds before knocking. A teen opened the door. He couldn't have been more than 16. Thin frame, hoodie pulled tight around his face. You lost? The boy asked. Jacob cleared his throat. Looking for Dolores. She said I could stop by. The kid gave him a long, careful look. She's in the back. Kitchen. Jacob stepped in. The air smelled like canned corn and disinfectant. People were already seated along the folding tables, some eating, others just sitting quietly with their heads low. It was louder than the night before. Not chaotic, but full. The kind of noise that comes from people surviving close together. He found her near the sink, scrubbing a large pot. You came back, Dolores said without turning around. I said I would. She looked over her shoulder. Gloves? He pulled them out and held them up. Dolores smiled. Good. I need chairs wiped down and trash collected. You afraid of elbow grease? Jacob grinned. Try me. She pointed him to a corner where a mop bucket and cleaner sat next to a broom. Jacob got to work, unsure of whether anyone was watching. He wiped every chair, changed 2 full trash bags, and helped sort the canned goods stacked along the far wall. After 40 minutes, he was sweating under the hoodie. Dolores didn't say much while they worked, just gave quiet instructions and moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. During a lull, they met at the sink again. She handed him a towel. You ever done work like this? She asked. Not since I was 14, Jacob replied, drying his hands. My uncle made me clean out gutters every weekend. I hated it, she chuckled. And now you own half the buildings in Mid-City. Jacob blinked. You knew that? Dolores nodded. I read the local news. Plus, Ms. Ray in 4B said she saw you in the paper last year, donating $1 million to the theater downtown. He looked at her. She talks to you about that? People talk to the ones who listen. Jacob paused. So, what do you think about me being here? Dolores wiped the rim of a bowl slowly, then looked up. I think if you're here to feel better about yourself, you won't last. He didn't flinch. And if I'm not, then maybe you might learn something. They were interrupted by a woman with a young girl at her side. The little one couldn't have been older than 4, tugging at her mom's coat, whispering that she was cold. Dolores knelt, peeled off her own sweater, and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. Just like that. No thought, no fuss. Jacob stood still, watching. So many of the people in the room didn't. The next time Jacob came by, it wasn't to mop floors or take out trash. It was Saturday morning. Baton Rouge was just waking up, the traffic on Florida Boulevard still light, and a faint fog hung over the sidewalks, like breath on cold glass. Jacob had called the number Dolores scribbled on a sticky note and asked if she'd be willing to sit down for coffee. Just talk. She told him to meet her at a diner off Plank Road called Lena's. No chain logos, no polished chrome, just a narrow building with faded yellow awnings and a hand-painted sign on the window that read, Home Fries and Jesus. Both free with kindness. He was early. She wasn't. Dolores walked in exactly 5 minutes late, wearing a blue cardigan with a missing button and jeans that had been repaired at the knees. She looked around, saw him by the window, and made her way over. No gloves today? She teased. He smiled. Thought I'd retire while I was ahead. They ordered. Black coffee for her, tea for him. She declined food, said she'd eaten earlier. He ordered toast just to have something to keep his hands busy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jacob finally said, You've been doing this a long time. Dolores stirred her coffee slowly. The center? He nodded. Started the month after my son died. He was 22, hit by a drunk driver off I-10. Wrong place, wrong time. Jacob didn't speak. He didn't know how to. Dolores stared into her cup like she could still see him. His name was Maurice. Smart boy. Thought he'd be a mechanic. He had hands like his daddy's. Always fixing something. She took a sip. After the funeral, people came around for a while. Neighbors, church folks. They brought food, said nice things. Then they went back to their lives. I didn't. I couldn't. Jacob's voice was soft. You lived alone? Still do. Husband passed 5 years after Maurice. Lung cancer. Worked at a refinery for 30 years. Then it took him in 6 months. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's life, isn't it? You carry what you have until it's too heavy, and then you figure out how to carry it anyway. Jacob felt the weight of her words. The kind of weight no money could lighten. What made you go to the center? He asked. Dolores shrugged. I walked past it for years. Then one day I just stepped inside, asked if they needed help. They said yes. That was it. And no one at work ever knew? What was there to say? I sweep floors and wipe down offices. That's what they pay me for. The rest, that's between me and the Lord. She paused, then added, You see a lot when you're invisible. People talk around you, not to you. They assume you got nothing to say. That's fine. I listen. You learn more that way. Jacob nodded slowly. I used to think money gave me power, made me important. Dolores smiled gently. Money don't make you important. It just gives you more choices. What you do with them, that's the part people remember. The waitress dropped off his toast and refilled their cups. Dolores leaned back, eyes drifting to the window. Most of the folks at the center don't want pity, she said. They want a reason to keep trying. A clean shirt, a hot meal, someone to ask how their day was. That's what keeps them coming back. Jacob looked down at his plate. His thoughts tangled. I've built so much, he muttered. Properties, deals, but none of it feels like what you do. Dolores smiled again. Smaller, softer this time. Then maybe you're not finished building. She stood and reached for her coat. Thank you for the tea. He stood too. Can I come back next week? You can, she said. But don't come just to feel better. Come because you mean it. I do. We'll see. She left the diner quietly, her back straight, her pace slow but steady. But that conversation sat with Jacob in a way nothing else had, like someone had just handed him a new map of a world he thought he already knew. The morning after that diner conversation, Jacob sat on his back porch, staring into his overgrown garden with a mind far from present. The birds chirped. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower droned. But he wasn't hearing any of it. He was thinking about his mother. He hadn't spoken to her in 7 years, not because of some dramatic fight. Just time, distance, an awkward silence that grew roots. She had worked nights when he was a kid, mopping high school gym floors, cleaning banks, wiping toilets in downtown law offices. He used to pretend it didn't embarrass him, but it did. He remembered the smell of lemon cleaner clinging to her clothes, her cracked hands, the way she fell asleep at the dinner table. He hated seeing her like that. So he worked harder, pushed himself through college, built his empire brick by brick, rental by rental, always chasing more. He told himself it was for her. But when she asked him to come home that last Thanksgiving, he said he was too busy. Now her number sat in his phone like a ghost he wasn't ready to face. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closed. Another memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought about in years. He was 13, got into a fight at school, split lip, bloody knuckles. He'd been suspended for 2 days, and no one came to pick him up except for an old janitor named Clyde. The man didn't say much, just gave him a ride home in a truck that smelled like tobacco and pine oil. But right before Jacob got out, Clyde said, "You can make all the money in the world, son, but if you don't use it to lift someone else up, it'll eat you alive." Jacob hadn't understood it then, but now those words wouldn't leave him. He stood up suddenly, went inside, and opened his laptop. He scrolled through documents, spreadsheets, building reports, everything in order, profits stable, tenants paid on time, but none of it mattered. Not after watching Dolores wrap her own sweater around a child with bare arms. Not after seeing her give away more in one night than he had in 10 years of tax-deductible donations. He clicked into his contacts, found the number for Daryl Houston, his business partner, and hit call. Daryl picked up on the second ring. "What's going on? You good?" Jacob hesitated. "I need to talk to you. Face to face. Right now." "Yeah, I'll come to your office." 30 minutes later, Jacob stepped into Daryl's high-rise suite on Government Street. Daryl was sipping an iced coffee and scrolling through lease projections on a giant monitor. "You look like you saw a ghost," Daryl said, motioning to the chair. Jacob sat, hands folded. "I want to reroute some funds." Daryl raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "There's a community center on South Oak. It needs repairs. Roof's leaking. Plumbing's bad. No HVAC. I want to fix it." Daryl laughed once. "You serious?" Jacob didn't smile. "You're talking about dumping money into a dump. That place should have been condemned 10 years ago." Jacob didn't blink. "And yet people are still there. Kids, mothers, volunteers who never left. So what? You want to play charity now? Open a soup kitchen?" "I want to put my money somewhere it means something." Daryl leaned back. "Jacob, we're real estate developers, not saints. You start throwing money into every bleeding cause in this city, you'll have nothing left to show for it." Jacob stood. "Maybe I'm tired of showing." Daryl scoffed. "Come on, man. We've got 2 properties breaking ground this quarter. Investors breathing down our necks. You're seriously thinking about shifting capital to a rundown center on the wrong side of town?" Jacob's voice was steady. "Yes." There was a long pause. "You've changed." Daryl muttered. "Maybe," Jacob replied. "Or maybe I'm finally paying attention." He walked out without another word. That night, Jacob sat in his kitchen, elbows on the table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. He started writing down numbers, names of contractors, repair timelines. But halfway through, he stopped, grabbed his phone, and dialed. It rang 3 times before she answered. "Hello? Ma, it's me." There was silence on the other end. "Jacob?" Her voice was smaller than he remembered. "Yeah, I wanted to hear your voice." She didn't cry, didn't scold. She just said, "It's good to hear yours too." But something about that call, and the door it reopened, made Jacob realize this wasn't just about fixing a building. It was about fixing what he'd spent years ignoring. 3 days later, Jacob showed up at the community center unannounced. It was mid-afternoon, before the dinner rush, before most people came in off the streets, and the building was quieter than usual. The front door was open, but the room had the feel of something catching its breath between two long efforts. Inside, an older woman named Ms. Thelma was setting out utensils. She wore a bright orange head wrap and moved like her knees had been arguing with her for years. She looked up as Jacob walked in. "You back again? I was hoping to see Dolores," he said. Ms. Thelma didn't miss a beat. "She's in the back with the boiler guy. Old thing's been making a racket all week." Jacob nodded, headed toward the back hall, and past a row of mismatched chairs stacked by the wall. The floor tiles were cracked. The drywall near the ceiling had water stains. The whole place looked like it was held together by sheer will. He found Dolores crouched next to an old boiler, talking with a man in greasy overalls who kept shaking his head. "Ma'am, I can get it running for a few more weeks," the man said. "But it's on its last legs." Dolores gave him a tired smile. "Do what you can." When she turned and saw Jacob, she didn't look surprised, just curious. "You keep showing up," she said. "I keep meaning to." She wiped her hands on her apron. "We're short tonight. You're not afraid of dish duty, are you?" "I'm not here to volunteer. Not today." Dolores raised an eyebrow, not saying a word. "I came to ask you something," Jacob said. "But first, can I show you something?" She stared at him for a second longer, then pulled off her gloves. "You got 10 minutes. They sat in a small side room, quiet except for a humming fridge and the occasional clatter from the kitchen. Jacob took a folded paper out of his jacket pocket and spread it across the table. It was a rough sketch. Handwritten notes, numbers, even a crude blueprint drawn in pencil. "What is this?" she asked. "My proposal," he said. "To renovate this place, replace the plumbing, fix the roof, install real heating and air, add a new walk-in freezer, turn that empty lot next door into a garden or a playground, whatever you need." Dolores didn't touch the paper. Her eyes stayed on him. "You want to do all that?" "Why?" Jacob sat back. "Because for years I built things that didn't matter, and then I saw what this place does with almost nothing. What you do. And I realized I've been measuring success wrong." She leaned back in her chair. "You're not the first person to promise big things," she said. "We had a city rep come through here 3 years ago, talking about funding. Gave us 2 trash cans and never showed again. I'm not here for credit." Jacob said, "No newspaper, no press release. I don't want my name on a plaque. I just want to help." She watched him for a long moment. Then she finally reached out and pulled the paper closer. Her eyes scanned the messy notes, the lists of vendors, the estimated costs. "How much of this can you actually make happen?" "Every line," Jacob said. "And more, if you think of something I didn't," she exhaled. It wasn't disbelief. It was weariness. Hope, she'd learned, had a way of wearing people down when it arrived too late. "I'd need to talk to the board," she said. "I'll come to the meeting," Jacob replied. "You say the word." Dolores looked up again. "I've got one condition. Anything. You don't take over. This stays ours. You help, you fund, you fix. But this is still a community center, not a pet project." Jacob nodded slowly. "Agreed." She folded the paper neatly and slid it back across the table. "Then we'll talk." He stood to leave, but paused. "One more thing," he said. "I'd like to start by covering meals for the next 6 months. Whatever you need, meat, produce, canned goods." Dolores stared at him, her face unreadable. Then she said, "We don't need a hero." "I know," Jacob replied. "Just a neighbor who finally woke up." She didn't smile. Not yet. But something in her eyes softened. But as word spread about Jacob's offer, not everyone in his life saw it the same way, and trouble was brewing just around the corner. The next day, Jacob was back in his office on the 10th floor of the LaSalle building, trying to catch up on emails he no longer cared about. His inbox was stacked with budget reports, lease renewals, and questions about a luxury condo project he'd been spearheading for the last 18 months. He'd spent years grooming that development. It was sleek, high-rise, over-designed, meant to attract high-income professionals moving into the city. But right now, It felt like a monument to everything he wanted to walk away from. He barely looked up when Daryl Houston walked in without knocking. "Jacob," Daryl said, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Jacob set his phone down. "Morning to you too." Daryl didn't smile. "I got an email from Monica over at City Permitting. Said she heard we were considering pulling funding from the Parkway Heights development." "We are," Jacob said calmly. "You are," Daryl corrected. "I've been fielding calls all morning from investors who are freaking out. You can't just reroute project capital without a vote." "I didn't. I paused it. That gives us breathing room to reassess." Daryl stepped closer. "Is this about that dump on South Oak?" Jacob met his eyes. "It's a community center, not a dump." "Jacob, I swear, if you're blowing our liquidity on a place that doesn't even show up on a zoning map, I'm walking." Jacob stood. "Then walk." Daryl stared at him like he didn't recognize the man standing in front of him. "You've lost it," he muttered. "All this time I thought you were the one who understood how this game works. You were the numbers guy. Cold, clear, precise." "I was," Jacob admitted. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe being precise doesn't mean being blind." Daryl laughed once. Bitter. "You want to be some working-class saint now? Build soup kitchens with granite countertops? What the hell happened to you?" Jacob didn't flinch. "I saw what it looks like when someone shows up every single day and gives everything they have to people no one else will even look at. That did something to me. I'm not ashamed of it. You're a businessman. I'm also a man. One who's tired of watching buildings get bigger while people get smaller." Daryl shook his head. "You want to throw your money away? Fine. But don't take this company down with you." Jacob sighed. "You know what, Daryl? Maybe we need less company and more community." Daryl stared at him for another few seconds, then grabbed the file folder from the desk and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Jacob sat back down, heart racing but clear-headed. He pulled up a spreadsheet, deleted the condo line item, and started building a new column labeled South Oak Renovation Fund. That night, he returned to the community center with a cart of groceries: eggs, fresh bread, cartons of milk, bags of beans and rice. Enough for 2 full weeks. Dolores was there, of course. She was always there. He handed her the receipt, but she didn't even look at it. "You doing okay?" she asked. "Had a rough morning," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Someone told you this place isn't worth it. Something like that?" Dolores started unpacking a box of potatoes. "You know, when I first started working here, someone told me the same thing. Said I was wasting my time feeding people who'd just end up back on the street." "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything," she replied. "I just kept showing up." Jacob helped her unload, handing her bags one at a time. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "No," she said. "I regret not doing it sooner." That night, Jacob stayed to serve the food. He didn't hide in the background. He ladled chili, handed out cornbread, and shook hands with anyone willing to offer one. And slowly, people began to notice. He wasn't the rich guy anymore. He wasn't the man in the tailored coat. He was just Jacob. Another set of hands, another human being willing to listen. But this time, he wasn't just passing through. He had a plan, and it was bigger than anyone expected. The following Monday, Jacob arrived at the South Oak Community Center before anyone else. He sat at one of the folding tables with a stack of printed documents, a cup of gas station coffee, and a notebook filled with scribbled ideas. He had barely slept. His mind wouldn't let him. Dolores walked in 20 minutes later, balancing a crate of dry goods on her hip. She froze when she saw him. "You planning to move in?" she asked with a smirk. "I thought about it," Jacob replied. "You got any spare cots in the back?" She set the crate down. "What's all that?" "Blueprints," he said. "Funding proposals, vendor quotes. I even pulled some pro bono labor from a few contractors I trust. People who owe me a favor." She approached slowly, suspicious but curious. "You didn't waste time." "I don't like wasting anything these days," Jacob said. "Especially not second chances." Dolores sat across from him, flipping through the first few pages. His plans weren't flashy. No marble floors or unnecessary upgrades. Just clean, solid work. Fixing the boiler, replacing the roof, installing real windows that locked and kept the cold out. A new walk-in freezer, better lighting, an emergency exit up to code. He watched her face for signs: approval, hesitation, rejection. "You did all this since Saturday?" she asked. He nodded. "I've been sitting on resources for years, just didn't have the right reason to use them." Dolores leaned back, her arms folded across her chest. "And what's your reason now?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a photo from his pocket and laid it on the table. It was of his mother, younger than Dolores, wearing a Walmart uniform and holding a mop. "I used to be embarrassed by her," he said softly. "She worked nights so I could go to school. I never said thank you. Not once." Dolores glanced at the picture. "She's still around?" "She is. We've talked twice this week. First time in years." Dolores was quiet. Then she reached for the notebook and flipped a few pages. "What's this?" she asked. "That's my idea for the lot next door. It's city-owned. I know someone who can get it transferred. I thought, maybe we turn it into a garden. Raised beds, fruit trees. An outdoor classroom," she blinked. "An outdoor classroom," he shrugged. "A place for kids to do homework, or adults to get job training. You tell me what this place needs, I'll build it." Dolores was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "You're serious? As a heart attack? You really think money's going to fix everything?" "No," Jacob said. "But I think it can fix the broken pipes and the flickering lights. After that, it's up to us." She closed the notebook gently. "There's a board meeting on Thursday," she said. "They'll want to hear this from you. Not just me. I'll be there. And just so you know," she added, "if any of them smell a sales pitch, they'll shut it down before you can blink." "I'm not selling," Jacob said. "I'm just finally ready to contribute." She stared at him again, deep, like she was trying to read the places even he hadn't looked. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. A full, genuine smile. "You're lucky," she said. "Why's that?" "Most people don't get a second chance at figuring out what matters." Jacob folded his papers and stood up. "I'm trying not to waste mine." Before he left, he stopped at the door. "One more thing," he said. "If the board says yes, I'd like to stay involved long-term, not just as a donor, maybe even help with programming. Outreach." Dolores tilted her head. "You ready for all that?" "I wasn't," he said. "But I think I am now." But no matter how well he planned, or how fast he moved, nothing could prepare him for what that first community board meeting would feel like, when he had to earn their trust the same way Dolores once did. The board met in a side room that Thursday evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops on South Oak. The space wasn't fancy, just 6 folding chairs, a warped table, and a single ceiling fan that clicked every few seconds, like a reminder that nothing here worked quite right. Jacob sat at the end of the table, his hands resting on the folder he'd brought. Across from him were the board members, Ms. Thelma in her signature orange head wrap, Pastor Raymond, who ran the food pantry next door, Nadine from the after-school program, and 2 others he hadn't met yet. Dolores sat in the corner, not as a board member, but as someone watching closely, listening hard. Jacob could feel the weight in the room. These weren't people who smiled easy. They'd seen broken promises before, grants that vanished, donors who showed up for photo ops and disappeared when the check cleared. They didn't care about blueprints or buzzwords. They cared about follow-through. Pastor Raymond adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Reinhardt, you've asked to present a proposal. You've got the floor." Jacob took a breath. "First, thank you for letting me be here. I'm not here representing any company. I'm not pitching a business deal. I'm here because I made a mistake, over and over, for a long time. I built things that looked good but meant nothing." He opened the folder and slid copies down the table. "This is my proposal to fully renovate the center. Repairs, upgrades, safety improvements. I've already lined up contractors and covered the cost estimates. No strings attached, no name plaques, no contracts requiring center control. This stays yours." Nadine raised an eyebrow. "And why would a millionaire property owner care about a place half the city forgets exists?" Jacob didn't flinch. because someone reminded me what real value looks like. It's not in square footage. It's in people like Dolores who show up every single day and do more with less than I ever did with millions. Miss Thelma glanced at Dolores. You vouch for him? Dolores nodded once. He means it. There was a pause. A long one. Finally, Pastor Raymond looked down at the papers. You realize what you're promising is more than this center's seen in 20 years. I do, Jacob said. And I'm not asking you to believe me today. I'm asking for the chance to prove it. For the next 20 minutes, they questioned everything. Timelines, insurance, maintenance, logistics. Jacob answered without hesitation. He knew his numbers. But more than that, he knew their fears. When the questions stopped, the board members stood and excused themselves to the next room. Jacob waited alone with Dolores. I think they liked you, she said. They looked like they wanted to throw me out. She smiled. Same thing around here. 10 minutes later, the board returned. Pastor Raymond sat down, folded his hands, and said, We'll accept your proposal, with conditions. Name them, Jacob said. You keep your promise. No strings, no branding. And you show up once a month to report in person. We don't need a ghost donor. We need someone who's present. Jacob nodded. Deal. As they packed up, Ms. Thelma handed him a small note scribbled in blue ink. It read, Don't let us down. We've been let down enough. He folded it and placed it in his wallet. Months passed. Quietly. Steadily. Construction began. A new roof went on. The broken boiler was replaced. Fresh drywall covered water stains. The outdoor lot transformed, first into rubble, then into soil, and finally into a garden with neat rows of greens and tomatoes. Kids helped plant. Teens helped paint. Seniors watched from folding chairs and gave advice no one asked for but everyone needed. And through it all, Jacob showed up. Every Thursday evening. Rain or heat, he served food, cleaned up, and sometimes just listened. Not as a benefactor. Not as the rich guy. Just Jacob. One night, Dolores handed him a cup of coffee, same way she had months ago in that diner. You know, she said, I was scared when you first walked into this place. Of me? Of hoping again. Jacob looked around the room. It was full, noisy, alive, held together by love and stubbornness. You still scared? He asked. She sipped her coffee. Only that we'll need more chairs. They laughed, easy and real. Then Jacob's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Proud of you. Call me tomorrow. He smiled, tucked it away, and turned back to the room. The building was stronger now. But what really changed wasn't the walls. It was him. If you've made it this far, I hope this story reminds you of something important. Change doesn't start with millions. It starts with one decision to care. If this moved you, subscribe for more stories like this. Because sometimes the most unexpected people show us what it means to live with purpose.